Sharon Watson had buried the past deep enough to almost believe it was gone. Then the hospital handed her a piece of paper that dug it all back up. Her hands trembled as she read the name, Derek Xavier. The DNA match was undeniable. Her son, Donald, the little boy giggling in the waiting room, belonged to a ghost. The nurse called Sharon's name twice before she moved. The envelope felt heavier than paper should, and when she finally tore it open, the black letters seemed to burn through her vision. 99.99% probability. 3 numbers that proved her 4-year-old son belonged to the one man she'd spent years trying to forget, Derek Xavier. The Mafia boss the whole town thought was dead. She didn't scream, didn't faint, didn't call anyone. She just sat there on the cold plastic chair in the hospital corridor, the paper crinkling between her fingers, while Donald's laughter echoed from the children's play area down the hall. That sound, bright, innocent, untouched by the violence she'd run from, felt like a betrayal now, because she'd heard that same laugh before, years ago, wrapped in different skin. Before we get started, don't forget to give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support helps us bring you even more incredible stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into the story. Sharon had always told herself Donald's smile was hers. His eyes, his stubborn streak, his way of tilting his head when he listened, all hers. She'd convinced herself so thoroughly that the truth felt like theft. Every feature she'd claimed suddenly belonged to someone else. You have to understand, when she met Derek Xavier, she didn't know what he was. He'd said he ran a business, and she'd believed him because she wanted to. The kind of business that kept him up at night, that made him check the locks twice, that left scars on his knuckles, he never explained. She thought he was just careful. Turned out he was protecting her from a world she'd been too naive to see. When Sharon discovered she was pregnant, she vanished. No phone call, no explanation, no goodbye, just a duffel bag, a bus ticket, and the city lights of New York fading behind her at dawn. Derek never came after her. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he did, and let her go anyway gave her time to bury the secret deep enough that she'd start believing her own lies. 4 years later, the past arrived in that manila envelope. The DNA test had been routine, just a safety measure. Donald had fallen ill with a fever that wouldn't break, and the hospital needed genetic confirmation for treatment. Sharon had given her blood, his blood, and in a moment of fear mixed with guilt, she'd included Derek's name in the paternity database. She never expected it to find a match. The system was supposed to show nothing. Instead, it showed everything. That was the moment Sharon stopped breathing. She folded the paper and shoved it deep into her purse, drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white, made mac and cheese for dinner, helped Donald brush his teeth, read him 2 bedtime stories instead of 1, kissed his forehead and whispered that everything was fine. But every second after that felt like a countdown. She knew Derek would come. Men like him always found what belonged to them. That night, Sharon locked every window in the apartment, checked the deadbolt 3 times, barely slept. The next morning, just after sunrise, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the small living room. Deliberate, final, unmistakable. Sharon's hands went numb. Donald was eating cereal at the kitchen table, humming a song from his favorite cartoon. She told him to stay put, her voice too bright, too forced. Then she walked to the door like she was walking toward an execution. When she opened it, Derek Xavier filled the entire doorframe. He looked exactly as she remembered, black suit, collar open just enough to reveal the tattoos crawling up his neck like old sins. Same sharp jawline. Same dark eyes that could freeze you solid or burn you alive depending on what you said next. He was supposed to be dead. The papers had said so 3 years ago, after the gang war that tore through half the city. But here he stood, alive and utterly still, watching her with the kind of calm that made her chest tighten. "Sharon," he said. Her name in his voice still had power. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. He tilted his head slightly, the ghost of a smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "You should have called." He knew. Of course he knew. Sharon tried to close the door, but Derek's hand caught it mid-swing. He didn't push, didn't force, just held it there firm, patient, impossible to move. "Let go," she said. He looked down at her like she'd said something sweet and pointless. Then, quietly, with a weight that hit harder than shouting, "You kept him from me." "I kept him safe," Sharon shot back, her voice trembling. Derek stepped inside. Just one step, but the air in the room changed instantly, thicker, heavier, charged with something dangerous. His gaze swept over the cramped apartment, the second-hand furniture, the toys scattered across the rug, the small sneakers by the door. When his eyes landed on Donald's backpack, bright blue with a cartoon dinosaur, his expression softened for just a heartbeat. And that was worse than anger. "His name's Donald," Derek said quietly, like he'd already memorized it, like it was already carved into him. Sharon swallowed hard. "He doesn't know who you are. He will." "Don't," Sharon snapped, stepping between Derek and the kitchen. "Don't do this here." But it was too late. Donald had already noticed the stranger. He peeked around the doorway, curly hair bouncing, clutching his teddy bear, and asked in that small, curious voice, "Children have?" "Mummy, who's that man?" Derek froze. All that iron control he wore like armor cracked wide open. His jaw tightened, his throat moved. And then, so softly Sharon almost missed it, he said, "My son." Sharon wanted to scream, to tell him he didn't get to claim Donald now, not after everything. But when she looked at Derek, she saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Not the kind that came from danger. The kind that only showed up when you realized you'd already lost something once and couldn't survive losing it again. Sharon told Donald to go to his room. The boy hesitated, confused by the tension, then ran off with his bear tucked under one arm. The second he disappeared down the hallway, Derek spoke again. "I didn't know, Sharon. I think you would have used him," she said, voice shaking. "Just another reason for someone to come after you." Derek's mouth curved into something humorless. "You think that little of me? I think you live in a world that doesn't care about children, and you think yours does." He stepped closer, voice low and sharp as a blade. "You think hiding him in this shoebox apartment, working double shifts, pretending you're invisible, that's safety?" Sharon's throat burned. "At least he's alive." Derek exhaled hard, dragging a hand through his hair. When he looked at her again, all the calm was gone, stripped away. What remained was raw. "Sharon, you don't understand. There's a target on both of you now." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "Someone's been watching," Derek said, his voice flat with controlled fury. "They sent me the same file you got. The DNA results weren't as private as you thought." And just like that, the world Sharon had built, the quiet life, the safe distance, the carefully constructed lies shattered like glass. Because the past hadn't just found her, it had been hunting her all along. And now, with Derek Xavier standing in her living room and enemies circling in the shadows, Sharon had to face the truth she'd spent 4 years running from. Some ghosts refuse to stay buried, especially when they have a son they never knew existed. Sharon didn't sleep that night. How could she? Derek Xavier sat in her living room like a piece of furniture that didn't belong, too expensive, too dangerous, too real. He'd refused to leave after dropping the bomb about the leak, insisting his men needed time to sweep the area for threats. She'd wanted to throw him out, call the police, do something, but the fear in his eyes when he'd mentioned the Vargas family kept her frozen, so she'd let him stay. Let him sit on her worn couch with his gun resting on the coffee table like it was normal. Let him drink the coffee she made at 3 a.m. when neither of them could pretend to rest. By dawn, exhaustion weighed on her like wet concrete. "You should go," Sharon said, arms crossed, standing in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. "Before Donald wakes up." Derek looked up from his phone, his face unreadable. "I'm not leaving. This isn't your house." "No," he agreed, setting the phone down. "But that's my son sleeping down the hall. That changes things." Sharon's jaw tightened. "You don't get to decide that." "I already did." The words landed with quiet finality. No anger, no negotiation, just fact. That was the thing about Derek, he didn't argue. He simply was, and the world bent around him. Before Sharon could respond, the sound of small footsteps padded down the hallway. Donald appeared, rubbing his eyes, his teddy bear dragging behind him. He stopped when he saw Derek still sitting there, his small face scrunching in confusion. "Mummy, why is the man still here?" Sharon's heart clenched. She opened her mouth to answer, but Derek spoke first. "Because I'm not leaving," he said gently, his voice losing its edge entirely. "Not yet." Donald studied him with the blunt curiosity only children possessed. "Do you live here now?" "Donald," Sharon started. "Maybe," Derek said, and this time he smiled, small, hesitant, but real. "Would that be okay with you?" The boy shrugged, utterly unbothered. "Okay. Can you make pancakes?" Derek blinked, caught off guard for the second time in 12 hours. "I don't know. Mommy makes the best pancakes," Donald announced, then shuffled toward the kitchen, leaving the two adults staring after him. Sharon exhaled slowly. "You can't do this. Watch me." 2 hours later, Sharon opened the front door to take out the trash and froze. Across the street, Mrs. Chen stood on her porch, arms folded, staring directly at Sharon's apartment. Next door, Mr. Holloway had paused mid-mowing his lawn, his gaze fixed on the sleek black car parked in front of her building, the kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood, the kind that screamed money and danger in equal measure. Derek's car. Sharon's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on keeping Derek out of Donald's life that she hadn't considered what his presence would do. This was a quiet neighborhood. People noticed things. People talked. She hurried back inside, slamming the door harder than she intended. "They're watching," she hissed, finding Derek in the kitchen with Donald, who was showing him his toy cars. Derek didn't look up. "I know." "You know?" Sharon's voice pitched higher. "Derek, this is a small town. By noon, everyone's going to know you're here. Do you understand what that means for me? For him?" Now he looked up, his expression unreadable. "It means they'll think twice before coming near either of you. Or it makes us a bigger target." Derek stood slowly, and the kitchen suddenly felt smaller. He moved toward her, closing the distance until she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. When he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, laced with something that might have been regret. "Sharon, they already know. The second that DNA test hit the system, every family with a grudge put eyes on you. The Vargas crew, the Italians, even some of my own people who think a kid makes me weak." He paused, jaw tight. "You were never invisible. You were just unprotected." The word hit like a slap. "I've been fine for 4 years, she said, but her voice wavered. "You've been lucky," Derek corrected. "There's a difference." By mid-morning, the whispers had started. Sharon could feel them even from inside the apartment, the eyes on her building, the phones coming out, the neighborhood group chat probably exploding with speculation. She peeked through the blinds and saw exactly what she feared. Clusters of neighbors talking in hushed tones, glancing toward her door. The nurse from down the hall, Kelly, who'd always been friendly, walked past without waving. Sharon let the blinds snap shut. "They think I'm one of you now," she said quietly. Derek was leaning against the counter, watching Donald build a tower of blocks in the living room. "You are." "I'm not." "You had my son," Derek interrupted, his voice soft but immovable. "That makes you family. In my world, family is everything. It's also a liability." Sharon's hands trembled. "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I." He turned to face her fully, and for a moment, the mask slipped. She saw the exhaustion, the frustration, the barely contained fear. "But here we are, and I'm not letting anything happen to him, or you." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You didn't even know he existed until yesterday. Why do you suddenly care?" Derek's eyes darkened. "Because he's mine, Sharon. That's not something I take lightly." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You think I wanted this life? You think I chose to be the guy people cross the street to avoid? I didn't, but I learned the rules. And rule number 1 is, you protect what's yours, no matter what." Sharon wanted to argue, to push him away, to scream that Donald wasn't his to claim, but the truth was already written in the curve of Donald's smile, the shape of his eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw when he focused on his toys. Derek was right, and that terrified her more than anything. Before she could respond, Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his entire body went rigid. "What?" Sharon asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Derek's jaw clenched. He looked up, and the calm was gone, replaced by something cold and lethal. "Someone just posted a photo of my car outside your building. It's on 3 different forums already." Sharon's blood turned to ice. What does that mean? Derek was already moving, grabbing his jacket, checking his gun. It means we're out of time. Pack a bag. Just the essentials. We're leaving. Now. Leaving? Derek, I have work tomorrow. Donald has preschool. He grabbed her by the shoulders, not rough, but firm enough to cut through her panic. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Sharon saw genuine fear in them. Sharon, listen to me. If they know where you live, they're already on their way. We have maybe an hour before someone shows up to see if the rumors are true. And when they do, I can't protect you both here. Not in the open, not like this. Her breath caught. Where are we supposed to go? Derek's grip softened, but his voice stayed sharp. Somewhere they can't touch you. Somewhere I control. He paused, then added quietly, almost like an apology. My house. On Hollow Ridge. Sharon stared at him, the weight of the decision crushing her chest. Her entire life was here, her job, her routine, the fragile normalcy she'd built. But as she looked past Derek toward the living room, where Donald sat oblivious, humming to himself as he played, one thought cut through everything else. He's not safe here anymore. One bag, she whispered, and we're not staying long. Derek nodded once, already pulling out his phone to make calls. Whatever you say. But they both knew the truth. Once they crossed that threshold, there was no coming back. The photo went viral before Sharon even knew it existed. By Monday morning, it was everywhere, a grainy image snapped through the hospital's glass doors 3 days earlier, when Derek had first shown up. In it, he stood on the front steps, sharp-suited and unmistakable, his tattooed neck visible even in the poor quality. And beside him, barely in frame, was Sharon holding Donald's hand. The caption read, Derek Xavier, seen at local clinic holding a child. The Mafia boss everyone thought was dead has resurfaced, and he's not alone. Underneath, the comments section exploded. Is that his kid? Who's the woman? I heard she's a nurse there. Poor kid. She knew what she was getting into. Sharon discovered it when her phone started buzzing non-stop texts from co-workers, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, and one message from her supervisor. We need to talk. Come to my office as soon as you arrive. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the blog post, watching her life unravel in real time. The photo had been shared 200 times, 500, 1,000. Within hours, it wasn't just online, it was the only thing people in town could talk about. At the hospital, silence followed Sharon like a shadow. She walked through the staff entrance with her head down, praying no one would notice. But the moment she stepped into the break room, conversation stopped. Eyes flicked toward her, then away. Someone cleared their throat. A chair scraped against the linoleum. Kelly, the nurse who used to share her lunch breaks, grabbed her coffee and left without a word. Sharon stood frozen in the doorway, her chest tightening. Sharon. Her supervisor's voice cut through the tension. My office. Now. The meeting lasted 10 minutes. The words blurred together: liability, reputation, safety concerns, paid leave. Sharon barely registered them. All she heard was the unspoken message underneath. You're a problem now. We don't want problems here. She left the hospital in a daze, her badge deactivated, her locker cleaned out. 4 years of work erased in a single conversation. By the afternoon, the whispers had reached the playground. Sharon sat on a bench near the swings, watching Donald chase after another boy, his laughter bright and uncomplicated. For a moment, she let herself believe things could still be normal, that she could still give him the quiet, safe childhood she'd promised. Then she noticed the other mothers. They stood in a cluster near the slide, heads bent together, voices low. One of them, Amanda, who used to organize playdates, glanced in Sharon's direction, then quickly looked away. Another mother, someone Sharon didn't recognize, pulled her daughter off the jungle gym mid-climb and whispered something in her ear. The little girl looked at Donald, then shook her head. Sharon's stomach twisted. When Donald ran over, breathless and grinning, asking if he could play with the other kids, Sharon forced a smile. Not today, baby. Let's go home. But Mummy. Now, Donald. The walk back to the car felt like a gauntlet. She could feel their eyes on her back, could hear the whispers starting up again the moment she was out of earshot. By the time she buckled Donald into his car seat, her hands were trembling so badly she could barely grip the seatbelt. Derek was waiting when she got home. He stood in her living room like he owned it, phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and cold as he barked orders to someone on the other end. When he saw Sharon, he ended the call immediately. "We need to leave," he said without preamble. "Tonight." Sharon set her purse down, exhaustion weighing on her like iron. "I'm not running again. This isn't running, it's survival." "It's the same thing." Derek's jaw tightened. "Sharon, my informant just confirmed it. The Vargas family put a bounty on Donald. $50,000 to whoever delivers him alive." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Sharon stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter. They want to kidnap him?" "They want leverage," Derek said, his voice hard. "A way to get to me, and your son is the easiest target." "No," Sharon shook her head, panic rising. "No, this is insane. We'll go to the police. They can protect us." "The police can't stop the Vargas crew," Derek said flatly. "But I can, if you let me. By locking us away, by making us prisoners in your world, by keeping you alive." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Sharon, I have a safe house. Hollow Ridge. It's remote, secure, off every radar. No one gets in without going through my men first. You'll be safe there, both of you." Sharon's hands curled into fists. "I can't just leave everything. My job, my apartment, Your job already fired you," Derek interrupted, and the bluntness of it made her flinch. "The hospital made you take leave. I know. I have people watching." Anger flared in Sharon's chest. "You're spying on me." "I'm protecting you," Derek shot back. "There's a difference. I didn't ask for your protection." "You didn't have to." His voice rose for the first time, raw and edged with frustration. "The second you had my son, you became my responsibility, whether you like it or not." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Donald's voice drifted from the other room, humming a song he'd learned at preschool, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Sharon closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "I just wanted a normal life for him." "I know," Derek said quietly. "But normal isn't an option anymore." Sharon refused to pack. She sent Derek away that night, ignoring his warnings, ignoring the tension in his voice when he told her to lock every door, check every window. She needed space, needed to think, needed to prove to herself that she still had control over her own life. She put Donald to bed, read him 2 stories, kissed his forehead. Then she poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, staring at the photo on her phone, the one that had destroyed everything. Derek Xavier, larger than life, and her beside him, looking small and trapped. "This isn't my life," she thought. "This can't be my life." The crash came at 11:47 p.m. Glass exploded inward, spraying across the living room floor. Sharon screamed, dropping her wine, scrambling off the couch. In the center of the shattered window lay a jagged rock, wrapped in white paper and tied with string. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. The message was written in blocky red letters, the ink still wet. "If we can't reach him, we'll reach the boy." Sharon's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, the note clutched in her hand, glass crunching beneath her. From down the hall, she heard Donald's small, frightened voice. "Mummy, what was that noise?" She couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. All she could do was stare at the broken window, the cold night air pouring in, and realize with sickening clarity that Derek had been right all along. They weren't safe here. They'd never been safe. With trembling hands, Sharon pulled out her phone and dialed the number Derek had left. He answered on the first ring. "Sharon?" Her voice came out hoarse, broken. "I'll go. To your safe house. I'll go." There was a pause. Then Derek's voice, calm, steady, but underlaid with something that sounded like relief. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Pack light." "And Sharon?" "Yeah?" "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." The line went dead. Sharon stood slowly, glass crunching under her feet, and walked toward Donald's room. Her hands had stopped shaking. In their place was something colder, harder. Fear had given way to clarity. If they wanted her son, they'd have to go through her first. And now, they'd have to go through Derek too. The house appeared through the trees like something out of a different life entirely. Sharon pressed her forehead against the car window, watching as the forest gave way to a sprawling property perched on the edge of a ridge. The house itself was modern, all clean lines, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the late afternoon sun. A wrought iron gate rolled open as Derek's car approached, operated by someone she couldn't see. "This is where you live?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I need to disappear," Derek said, pulling into the circular driveway. "No one knows about this place except my inner circle. It's not on any registry, no paper trail. As far as the world's concerned, it doesn't exist." Sharon glanced back at Donald, who was pressed against his window, eyes wide with wonder. "It's like a castle, Mummy." "It's a prison," Sharon muttered. Derek cut the engine and turned to look at her. "It's shelter. There's a difference." Inside, the house felt like a contradiction, warm wood floors and soft lighting, but cameras in every corner and reinforced doors that locked with electronic codes. Beautiful, but built for survival. Derek showed them to their rooms, 2 bedrooms on the second floor connected by a shared bathroom. Donald's room had already been prepared, a bed with fresh sheets, a box of toys in the corner, even a nightlight shaped like a dinosaur. "You did this?" Sharon asked, standing in the doorway. Derek shrugged, hands in his pockets. "I made some calls while you were packing. Figured he'd need stuff." It was such a simple gesture, but it made Sharon's chest ache. This man, this dangerous, complicated man, had thought about her son's comfort, had gone out of his way to make a 4-year-old feel at home in a safe house. "Thank you," she said quietly. Derek nodded once, then left her alone to unpack. The first few days passed in strange, suspended quiet. Sharon barely left her room except to make meals or check on Donald. She felt like a ghost haunting someone else's house, moving through spaces that didn't belong to her. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. But Donald adapted with the effortless resilience only children possessed. By the 3rd morning, he was trailing after Derek like a shadow, asking endless questions. "What's that? Where does this go? Can I see?" Derek answered each one with patience. Sharon hadn't known he had, letting Donald follow him through the house, showing him the garden, the garage, the deck that overlooked miles of forest. On the 4th day, Sharon looked out the kitchen window and stopped dead. Derek was kneeling in the driveway, holding a small red bike steady while Donald climbed onto the seat, his face scrunched in concentration. The bike still had training wheels, but Donald gripped the handlebars like his life depended on it. "You got it," Derek said, his voice low and encouraging. "Just pedal. I've got you." Donald pushed forward, wobbling slightly, and Derek walked beside him, one hand on the bike's seat, the other hovering near Donald's back. When Donald started to tip, Derek steadied him without a word. "I'm doing it," Donald shouted, his voice bright with triumph. "Yeah, you are." Derek's smile was small, almost hesitant, but genuine. Sharon watched from the window, her throat tight. She told herself it didn't matter, told herself this was temporary, a few weeks at most, just until the threat passed. But watching Derek with her son, patient and careful and present, shattered something inside her she'd worked years to build. This wasn't supposed to happen. Donald wasn't supposed to know him, wasn't supposed to like him, but he did. That night, Derek cooked dinner. Sharon had expected takeout, maybe something microwaved, but instead, he stood at the stove, chopping vegetables with the precision of someone who'd learned through necessity. She watched from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to reconcile this version of Derek with the man whose name used to make headlines. "You cook?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Derek glanced over his shoulder. "You sound shocked." "I am." "Why? You think I survive on intimidation alone?" He slid the vegetables into a pan, the sizzle filling the kitchen. "I learned young. My mother worked 3 jobs. If I wanted to eat, I figured it out." Sharon stepped further into the room, leaning against the counter. "I didn't know that about you. There's a lot you don't know." The words hung between them, not accusatory, just honest. They ate at the long dining table, Derek at one end, Sharon at the other, Donald between them, chattering about the bike and the trees and a bird he'd seen. For a moment, it almost felt normal, almost felt like a family. But when Donald went to bed and silence settled over the house, the weight of everything pressed down again. Sharon found Derek on the deck later that night, leaning against the railing, staring out at the dark forest. She hesitated in the doorway, then stepped outside. The cold air bit at her skin. "Can't sleep?" Derek asked without turning around. "Not anymore." Sharon wrapped her arms around herself. Every time I close my eyes, I see that note. Derek's jaw tightened. They won't get to you here. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. He turned to face her, his expression hard. I've spent my entire life in this world, Sharon. I know how it works, how they think, and I know how to keep you safe. At what cost? Sharon's voice cracked. My job's gone. My reputation's destroyed. My son is learning to ride a bike from a man whose enemies want him dead. This isn't, she broke off, shaking her head. I didn't want this life. Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Neither did I. Sharon looked up, startled. You think I chose this? Derek continued, his gaze distant. You think I wanted to be the guy everyone fears? I was 17 when I got pulled in, had no choice. It was survive or disappear. He paused, his expression hardening. I learned the rules, learned how to win, but it cost me everything normal people take for granted. Friends, trust, a life that doesn't end in blood. Then why stay? Sharon asked. Why not walk away? Because walking away gets you killed. Derek turned to her fully, his dark eyes locking onto hers. And because now I have something worth staying alive for. The air between them shifted, charged, heavy with unspoken things. This is the only life I know, Derek said quietly. The only one that lets me keep you alive. Keep him alive. I'm not asking you to forgive me for what I am, but I'm asking you to let me protect what's mine. Sharon's breath caught. We're not. You are, Derek interrupted, his voice firm. Whether you accept it or not, you had my son. That makes you family. And I don't let family get hurt. Silence stretched between them. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Sharon wanted to argue, to push him away, to insist that they weren't his responsibility. But standing there, under the weight of his gaze, she couldn't find the words. Because deep down, beneath the fear and anger and resentment, she knew the truth. Without Derek, they wouldn't survive what was coming. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to face it alone anymore. Okay, she whispered finally. Derek's expression softened, just slightly. Okay. They stood there in the cold, two people bound by a child and a past neither could escape. And for the first time since the DNA test arrived, Sharon felt something other than fear. She felt seen. Derek's phone rang at 4 a.m., shattering the fragile quiet of Hollow Ridge. Sharon heard it from her room, the low murmur of his voice, then the sharp crack of something hitting a wall. She pulled on her robe and crept downstairs, finding Derek in his office, phone still pressed to his ear, his knuckles white around the device. Find her, he said, voice lethal. I don't care what it takes. Find her and bring her to me. He ended the call and hurled the phone onto the desk. It skidded across the wood, stopping just before the edge. What happened? Sharon asked from the doorway. Derek's head snapped up, his expression dark. For a moment, he didn't speak, just stared at her, like he was deciding how much truth she could handle. Then he exhaled slowly, dragging a hand through his hair. The leak, he said. I know who it was. Sharon's stomach dropped. Who? A nurse. Rebecca Lawson. Works in records at the hospital. Derek's jaw tightened. The Vargas family paid her $20,000 to flag any DNA tests with my name attached. The second your results came through, she sent them a copy. Sharon felt the blood drain from her face. Rebecca? I know her. She works the night shift. She's always been nice. Nice doesn't mean loyal, Derek said coldly. She sold you out for a down payment on a car. The weight of it hit Sharon like a freight train. Someone she'd worked beside, someone she'd shared coffee with in the break room, had handed her son over to criminals without a second thought. For money. Where is she now? Sharon asked, her voice shaking. Gone. Disappeared 2 days ago. Probably halfway across the country by now. Derek's hands curled into fists. But my people will find her, and when they do, Derek. Sharon stepped into the room, her fear giving way to something sharper. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Your world, your enemies. And now, my son, our son, is paying the price for it. Derek's eyes flashed. You think I don't know that? I think you've been living in this nightmare so long, you forgot what it costs everyone around you. Sharon's voice rose despite herself. That woman sold us out because of you. Because your name carries a bounty, because people see you as either a threat or an opportunity, and we're just collateral damage. You're not collateral, Derek shot back. You're family. That's why I'm protecting you. By locking us in a house on a hill, by teaching my son to hide, by keeping him alive. Derek stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You want to know why I'm the monster everyone whispers about? It's because I do what needs to be done. No hesitation, no mercy. That's the only language this world understands. Sharon shook her head, tears burning her eyes. You weren't always this. When I met you, you were a lie, Derek interrupted, his voice quieter now but no less sharp. Everything you thought I was, a lie. The charm, the smiles, the business, all of it. Because the truth was too ugly to show you. Then show me now, Sharon demanded. Tell me the truth, all of it. Derek stared at her for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering across his face. Then he sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older, more tired than she'd ever seen him. You know about the massacre, he said finally. 3 years ago, the one that left 18 people dead in a warehouse on the east side. Sharon nodded. She remembered. The entire city had been paralyzed for weeks. Everyone thinks I ordered it, Derek continued, his voice hollow. The police, the papers, even my own people. They think I executed a rival crew to consolidate power. He looked up at her, his dark eyes shadowed. But I didn't. I was framed. Sharon's breath caught. By who? Marcus Vega, my second in command, my brother. Derek's hands tightened on the armrests. He set it up, made it look like I gave the order, then used the fallout to seize control while I went underground. By the time I realized what he'd done, half my operation had turned on me. The other half thought I'd gone soft. So you disappeared, Sharon whispered. I had to. Staying meant war, and war meant bodies. Derek's expression hardened. But Marcus made a mistake. He thought killing me would be enough. He didn't count on me coming back. Is he the one who put the bounty on Donald? No. But he's the reason the Vargas family knows I'm still alive. He's been feeding them information, using Donald as leverage to force me into the open. Derek leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. And when this is over, I'm going to make him regret every second of it. The call came just after dawn. Sharon was making coffee when Derek burst into the kitchen, his phone in one hand, his gun in the other. We have movement, he said sharply. 2 vehicles spotted on the access road. Armed. They're coming up the ridge. Sharon's heart stopped. The Vargas family? Probably. Derek was already moving, barking orders into his phone. Lock the doors. Get Donald. Stay in the interior room on the 2nd floor, no windows. Do not come out until I tell you. Panic clawed at Sharon's chest. Derek. Now, Sharon. She ran. Donald was still asleep when she scooped him into her arms, his small body warm and heavy. He stirred, mumbling something about the bike, but didn't wake fully. Sharon carried him to the windowless storage room Derek had shown her on their first day, locking the door behind them. Outside, she could hear Derek's men moving through the house footsteps, low voices, the metallic click of weapons being loaded. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with trembling hands, Donald's weight pressing against her shoulder. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her mind racing. Derek's men were killers, trained, dangerous, loyal to him but still criminals. The convoy outside was coming to take her son. And if Derek's solution was more violence, more bloodshed, how was that any different from the world she'd been running from? The police can protect us, she thought desperately. They have to. Her fingers moved before she could stop them, dialing 911. 911. What's your emergency? Sharon's voice came out in a rush. My name is Sharon Watson. I'm at a house on Hollow Ridge with my son. There are armed men approaching the property. We need help. Please, we need the police. Now. Ma'am, can you provide an address? Sharon rattled off the coordinates Derek had written on the fridge, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Units are being dispatched. Stay inside and away from windows. Help is on the way. Sharon ended the call and clutched Donald tighter, her breath coming in short gasps. She'd done the right thing. She had to believe that. But as footsteps thundered past the door and Derek's voice barked orders somewhere below, a cold dread settled in her chest. She'd just told the police exactly where they were, And if Derek found out, if he realized she'd called them without asking, he'd know she didn't trust him. Worse, she'd just exposed the one place he'd promised no one could find them. The one place they were supposed to be safe. Donald stirred against her shoulder, mumbling sleepily. "Mommy, what's happening?" Sharon pressed her lips to his forehead, tears stinging her eyes. "Nothing, baby," she whispered, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Everything's going to be okay." But outside, the sound of engines grew louder, and somewhere in the house, Derek was preparing for war. The first bullet shattered the kitchen window at 6:47 p.m. Sharon was heating up leftover pasta when the glass exploded inward, spraying across the counter. She screamed, dropping the pot, sauce splattering across the tile. Before she could move, Derek was there, grabbing her arm, yanking her down behind the island. "Stay low," he shouted over the sudden eruption of gunfire. Outside, headlights flooded the property. 5 vehicles skidding to a halt in the circular driveway. Car doors slammed, voices barked orders in Spanish, and then the world erupted into chaos. Bullets tore through the house like angry wasps, punching through walls, shattering windows, splintering wood. Derek's men returned fire from defensive positions, the sound deafening, the air thick with gunpowder and fear. "Donald!" Sharon screamed, her voice raw with panic. Second floor. Derek was already moving, gun in hand, pulling her toward the stairs. "Stay behind me." They ran, hunched low, glass crunching beneath their feet. Another window exploded above them, showering them with shards. Sharon's shoulder burned where something glass or wood had sliced through her shirt. Donald stood at the top of the stairs, frozen, his teddy bear clutched to his chest, tears streaming down his face. "Mommy!" Sharon lunged forward, scooping him into her arms. He was shaking, his small hands fisting in her robe. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." "Basement!" Derek barked, firing twice over his shoulder as a shadow moved past the broken window. "Now!" They descended into the basement, a reinforced space Derek had shown her once, dismissively, as if it were just storage. Now Sharon understood. Thick concrete walls, a heavy steel door, shelves stocked with water, canned food, medical supplies, a bunker. Derek slammed the door shut behind them and threw the deadbolt. The gunfire above became muffled, distant, but no less terrifying. Donald sobbed into Sharon's shoulder as she sank onto the floor, her back against the wall, her body wrapped around his. Derek moved to a panel on the wall, flipping switches. Monitors flickered to life, showing security feeds of the property. Sharon watched in horror as armed men poured out of vehicles, spreading across the driveway, advancing on the house. "How many?" she whispered. "Too many." Derek's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the screens. Vargas brought everything he had. Another explosion rocked the house, something heavier than bullets. The lights flickered. "They're using grenades," Derek said flatly. He grabbed a rifle from a rack on the wall, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. Then he pulled out a handgun, smaller, simpler, and held it out to Sharon. "Take this." She stared at it like it was a snake. I can't." "You can." Derek crouched in front of her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Safety's here. Point and shoot. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you use it. Understand?" Sharon's hands trembled as she took the gun, its weight foreign and terrifying. "Understand?" Derek repeated, harder this time. "Yes." He nodded once, then moved toward the door, positioning himself in front of it. Above them, the gunfire intensified. Shouts, crashes, the sound of splintering wood. Sharon held Donald tighter, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "You wanted to know what my world was?" Derek said quietly, his back to her, rifle raised. "Now you do." The door to the basement stairs exploded inward 20 minutes later. Sharon heard the footsteps, first heavy boots on concrete, moving fast, then voices, low and urgent, speaking Spanish. Derek fired twice, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Someone screamed. A body hit the floor, but more came. 3 men burst through the doorway, guns raised. Derek dropped one immediately, then dove behind the steel door as bullets ricocheted off concrete. Sharon screamed, pulling Donald behind her, shielding him with her body. One of the men turned toward them, his gun swinging in their direction. Sharon didn't think. She raised Derek's gun, her hands shaking so violently she could barely aim, and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her backward. The shot went wide, hitting the wall, but it was enough. The man flinched, turning back toward Derek, giving Derek the opening he needed. 2 more shots. Both men dropped. Silence crashed down like a wave. Sharon stared at the gun in her hands, her ears ringing, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She'd fired a weapon. She'd tried to kill someone. The thought made her stomach heave, but she couldn't let go. Her fingers stayed locked around the grip. Derek moved quickly, checking the bodies, securing their weapons. Blood smeared across the concrete floor, dark and spreading. Sharon forced herself to look away, pressing her face into Donald's hair. "It's okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "It's okay." But it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. The gunfire stopped 15 minutes later. Derek disappeared up the stairs, leaving Sharon and Donald huddled in the basement. She listened to the sounds above, shouts, footsteps, engines starting and fading into the distance. Then, finally, silence. When Derek returned, he was bleeding. A gash across his temple, another along his forearm. His shirt was torn, stained dark with blood, some his, some not. But he was standing, alive. "They're gone," he said, his voice rough. "For now." Sharon stood slowly, still holding Donald, the gun still in her hand. Derek noticed and gently pried it from her fingers, setting it aside. "You did good," he said quietly. Sharon shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I could have." "You protected him." Derek's eyes softened, just slightly. "That's all that matters." But Sharon couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop seeing the man's face when she'd pulled the trigger, couldn't stop feeling the weight of the gun, the recoil, the split-second decision that could have ended a life. She'd crossed a line tonight, stepped into Derek's world not as a bystander, but as a participant, and she didn't know how to step back. They emerged from the basement to devastation, windows shattered, walls pockmarked with bullet holes, furniture overturned, blood smeared across the hardwood floors. Derek's men moved through the wreckage, checking bodies, securing the perimeter. 2 of them were wounded. 1 was dead. Sharon stood in the middle of the living room, holding Donald, and felt the last pieces of her old life crumble. This was her reality now. Violence, fear, death. And Derek, bloodied, exhausted, but still standing, was the only thing between her son and the darkness waiting outside. He looked at her across the ruined room, and something unspoken passed between them. She'd seen his world now, lived it, survived it, and there was no going back. "We need to leave," Derek said, wincing as he pressed a hand to his wounded arm. "They'll regroup, come back with more." Sharon nodded numbly. "Where?" "Somewhere they'll never find us." Derek's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "But first, I'm ending this. Marcus." "All of them." "Derek." "No." He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "They came into my home, tried to take my son. That ends now." Sharon wanted to argue, wanted to beg him to just run, to keep running until they found some quiet corner of the world where no one knew their names. But looking at him, at the blood, the fury, the unshakable resolve, she knew. This was who Derek was. This was the only way he knew how to protect them. And despite everything, despite the fear and the chaos and the life she'd tried so hard to escape, she believed him. The police arrived at dawn, their sirens cutting through the morning mist like knives. Sharon watched from the shattered living room window as a convoy of black and whites wound up the ridge, lights flashing, turning Derek's sanctuary into a crime scene. Behind them came the news vans, 3, then 5, then too many to count, parking along the access road, reporters spilling out with cameras and microphones. Her stomach twisted with realization. "I called them. This is because of me." Derek stood beside her, his arm bandaged, his face unreadable as he watched the approaching vehicles. "Get Donald. Keep him upstairs. Don't let him see this." "Derek." Sharon's voice cracked. "I called them. Last night, before the shooting. I thought they could help." He turned to look at her, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes, hurt, maybe, or disappointment, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "I know," he said quietly. Sharon's breath caught. "You knew?" "One of my men monitors the line," he heard. Derek's jaw tightened. But it doesn't matter now. What's done is done. I'm sorry. I was scared. And I thought, you thought the police could protect you better than I could. His voice was flat, emotionless. You were wrong, but you'll figure that out soon enough. Before Sharon could respond, the first officers were at the door, fists pounding against the reinforced steel. Derek Xavier, this is the police. Open the door. Derek moved toward it, his hands raised, his movements slow and deliberate. Stay upstairs, he told Sharon one last time. No matter what happens. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. Police flooded the property, photographing the carnage, bagging evidence, interviewing Derek's men. Sharon gave her statement from the kitchen, now taped off like a crime scene, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, her voice mechanical as she recounted the attack. But the detective across from her wasn't interested in the Vargas family. He was interested in Derek. How long have you known Derek Xavier? Detective Morrison asked, his pen poised over a notepad. 4 years. We were together, briefly. And you didn't know what he was? Sharon's hands tightened around the cup. No, but you knew enough to run when you found out you were pregnant. I knew enough to protect my son. Morrison leaned forward, his expression skeptical. And yet here you are, living in his house, under his protection. Doesn't sound like you're trying very hard to stay away. Sharon's throat burned. He's Donald's father. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Miss Watson. Morrison closed his notebook. But you chose to align yourself with a known criminal. That makes you complicit. The word hit like a slap. Complicit. Sharon opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Because he was right, wasn't he? She'd stayed. She'd let Derek into Donald's life. She'd fired a gun to protect them. She'd become exactly what everyone would think she was. By noon, the footage was everywhere. Someone had dug up the hospital security video from weeks ago, the moment Derek had first arrived, standing on the front steps in his black suit, tattoos visible, calm and commanding. And beside him, barely visible in the frame, was Sharon holding Donald's hand. The still image was plastered across every news site, every social media platform, every local broadcast. Mafia boss Derek Xavier resurfaces with secret son. Single mother's shocking connection to organized crime. The woman who loved a monster. Sharon's phone exploded with notifications, messages from numbers she didn't recognize, voicemails from reporters, emails from former co-workers. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments, most of them vicious. She knew what he was. Gold digger. What kind of mother exposes her child to that? She's as guilty as he is. By the afternoon, the hospital made it official. Sharon Watson was terminated, effective immediately. Conduct unbecoming, association with criminal elements, liability. The email was 2 sentences long. Sharon read it 3 times before deleting it. The town turned faster than she'd expected. Parents who'd once smiled at her in the grocery store now avoided eye contact. Neighbors who'd waved from their porches now closed their doors when they saw her coming. Even Kelly, sweet, friendly Kelly, posted on social media, "Can't believe I worked with someone who was hiding this the whole time. Really makes you wonder who you can trust." By evening, Sharon's inbox was full of messages from old friends, each one a variation of the same theme. "I think it's best if we don't talk for a while. I need to protect my family. I hope you understand." She understood perfectly. She'd become a pariah, the woman who loved a monster, the mother who endangered her child, the scandal the whole town would whisper about for years. Sharon sat on the edge of the bed in Derek's house because it wasn't her house, would never be her house, and let the weight of it crush her. Everything she'd built, gone. Everyone she'd trusted, gone. The life she'd tried to give Donald, destroyed. Derek found her there an hour later, staring at nothing. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her, the mattress dipping under his weight. His arm was freshly bandaged, his face lined with exhaustion, but he was there. "I'm selling the properties," he said finally. Sharon blinked, pulling herself back to the present. "What?" "The clubs, the warehouses, the accounts, everything." Derek's voice was calm, measured. "I'm liquidating, paying off debts, cutting ties." Sharon turned to look at him, confused. "Why?" "Because I'm done." He met her gaze, something resolute in his eyes. "This life, it's over. I've already lost too much to it. I'm not losing you and Donald, too. You think you can fix this with money? Sharon's voice came out sharper than she intended, raw with pain. You think selling a few buildings is going to erase what happened, what we've become? No, Derek said quietly. With peace. Sharon stared at him, her breath catching. I can't undo the past, Derek continued. Can't change who I was or what I did, but I can stop. I can walk away, build something different, something that doesn't end in blood. He paused, his jaw tightening. For him, for you. Tears burned Sharon's eyes. The town already hates me. My life is ruined. Walking away won't change that. Then we start over, Derek said simply. Somewhere new. Different names, different lives. Just the three of us. You'd do that? Sharon whispered. Give up everything? Derek reached out, gently taking her hand. His palm was rough, scarred, a testament to the violence he'd lived. But his grip was steady. I already did, he said. The moment I found out I had a son. Sharon looked down at their joined hands, her vision blurring with tears. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that peace was possible, that they could escape the wreckage and build something good. But the comments still echoed in her mind. The hatred, the judgment, the woman who loved a monster. What if it's too late? She asked, her voice breaking. Derek squeezed her hand. Then we make it not be. Outside, the sun was setting over Hollow Ridge, painting the forest in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, the last news van pulled away, the reporters finally giving up their vigil. And in the ruins of everything they'd known, Sharon and Derek sat together in the quiet two people, trying to find their way out of the darkness, trying to believe that love, messy and dangerous and impossible as it was, might be enough to save them. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Sharon was making breakfast when Derek's phone rang. She watched from the kitchen as he answered, his face hardening with each passing second. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze blood. When? A pause. And they believed him? Another pause, longer this time. Understood. Derek ended the call and stood motionless, staring at nothing. What happened? Sharon asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Derek turned to face her, and she saw something she'd never seen in him before resignation. Marcus offered the DA a deal, full immunity in exchange for everything he knows about my operation. Derek's jaw tightened. Including this location, including you and Donald. Sharon's stomach dropped. They're coming here? They're already on their way. Federal agents, not local police. They'll be here within the hour. He dragged a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd known him, Derek Xavier looked defeated. It's over, Sharon. Then we run, Sharon said immediately, moving toward him. We pack the car, take Donald, and we leave. Right now. And go where? Derek's voice was quiet, almost gentle. They have my financials, my contacts, every property I've ever owned. Marcus gave them everything. He shook his head. There's nowhere left to hide. So what? You just give up? Sharon's voice cracked. After everything? Derek looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. No, I end it. An hour later, Derek Xavier made a phone call that would shock the entire state. He called the district attorney's office directly. This is Derek Xavier, he said, his voice steady. I'm calling to arrange my surrender. Sharon stood across from him, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. She'd begged him not to do this, screamed at him, told him they'd find another way. But Derek's mind was made up. I'll turn myself in on one condition, he continued, ignoring Sharon's silent pleas. Sharon Watson and my son are granted full immunity. No charges, no investigation, no surveillance. They walk away clean. He listened to the response, his expression unchanging. Then you get nothing, Derek said flatly. I disappear, and you spend the next 10 years chasing ghosts. A pause. But if you agree, I'll confess. Everything, every crime Marcus claims I committed. I'll give you the conviction you want. Sharon's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Derek was confessing to crimes he didn't commit. Taking the blame for Marcus's betrayal, sacrificing himself to protect them. Courthouse steps. 2 hours. Derek ended the call and finally looked at Sharon. You can't do this, she whispered. It's already done. Derek, you'll go to prison for years, for things you didn't even do. I know. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "But you and Donald won't. You'll be free, safe. That's all that matters." "It's not all that matters." Sharon moved toward him, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Donald needs his father. I need." She broke off, unable to finish. Derek's hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You need to give him a life that doesn't involve looking over your shoulder. A life where his father's name doesn't put a target on his back." His voice softened. "I can't give you that while I'm free, but I can give you that from inside." "This isn't fair," Sharon sobbed. "No," Derek agreed, "but it's right." The courthouse steps were packed by the time they arrived. News crews lined the sidewalk, cameras pointed at the building like weapons. Reporters shouted questions that no one answered. Police officers formed a perimeter, keeping the crowd back. And in the center of it all stood Derek Xavier, flanked by federal agents, about to give the confession that would end him. Sharon stood at the edge of the crowd, holding Donald's hand, her sunglasses hiding the redness of her eyes. She'd begged to stay home, to spare Donald this, but Derek had asked her to come. "I need to see you one last time," he'd said. "Just once." The DA stepped up to the podium, her expression grim but triumphant. "This morning, Derek Xavier contacted our office to arrange his surrender. In exchange for immunity for Sharon Watson and their son, Mr. Xavier has agreed to plead guilty to multiple charges, including racketeering, conspiracy, and accessory to murder." The crowd erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in chaos. But Sharon only heard the words guilty and murder. Crimes he didn't commit. A life sentence for protecting his family. The DA continued, but Sharon stopped listening. Her eyes were locked on Derek, who stood perfectly still, his hands cuffed in front of him, his expression unreadable. And then, as if feeling her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met across the chaos. Derek's face softened just for a moment, just for her. He didn't smile, didn't mouth any words, just looked at her with an intensity that made her chest ache, as if he were memorizing every detail, trying to hold on to this moment before it was taken from him. Sharon pressed a hand to her mouth, fresh tears spilling over. "I'm sorry," she wanted to scream. "This is my fault. I called the police. I exposed us." But Derek shook his head slightly, as if he could hear her thoughts, as if to say, "No, this was always going to end this way." "Daddy?" Donald's small voice broke through the noise. He'd finally spotted Derek, his face scrunched in confusion. "Why is Daddy with the police?" Sharon crouched down, pulling her son close. "Daddy has to go away for a little while, baby." "Where's he going?" Sharon's throat closed. "Somewhere safe." It was the kindest lie she could manage. The agents began moving Derek toward the waiting vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows. He walked with his head high, shoulders back, every inch the man who'd once commanded fear and respect. But just before he reached the car, he stopped, turned back one last time, and this time he did smile. Small, sad, but real, for her, for Donald, for the family he'd never expected to have and would now never get to keep. Then he was gone, folded into the SUV, the door slamming shut with a finality that echoed through Sharon's chest. The cameras kept rolling, the reporters kept shouting, the town kept watching, hungry for scandal, for closure, for proof that monsters always got what they deserved. But Sharon just stood there, holding her son, watching the SUV disappear down the street, and she knew somewhere beneath the pain and the fear and the overwhelming grief that Derek Xavier had done something no one expected. He'd proven that even the worst of men could love something more than themselves, even if it cost him everything. That night, the news stations played the footage on loop. Mafia boss confesses in stunning courthouse surrender. Derek Xavier pleads guilty to protect former lover and son. From criminal to martyr, the shocking sacrifice that has the whole town talking. Some called it justice, others called it tragedy. But Sharon Watson, sitting alone in the house on Hollow Ridge with her son asleep upstairs, called it what it really was. Love. Messy, dangerous, impossible love. The kind that outlived even the worst of men. 6 months later, Sharon Watson had learned to breathe again. Not easily, not without thinking, but she could wake up in the morning without her chest tightening, could walk Donald to his new preschool without checking over her shoulder, could make it through entire days without seeing Derek's face in every shadow. She'd left the town, left Hollow Ridge, left everything that carried the weight of who she'd been. Now she worked at a small clinic 2 hours north, using her maiden name, Sharon Brooks. The staff knew nothing about her past. To them, she was just another single mother trying to make ends meet, working double shifts when she could, always the first to volunteer for the difficult cases. They didn't know she was hiding her fear the only way she knew how. By working too much, Donald had adapted better than she'd expected. New school, new friends, new routine. But every night before bed, he asked the same question, "When is Daddy coming home?" And every night Sharon gave the same answer, "I don't know, baby. Soon, I hope." It was the kindest lie she had left. The evidence surfaced in March. Sharon didn't know about it at first. She'd stopped following the news, stopped checking her phone for updates, stopped torturing herself with what-ifs. Derek was gone. The case was closed. Moving forward was the only option. But the lawyer who showed up at her door one Tuesday evening had other ideas. "Miss Watson, my name is James Chen. I represent Derek Xavier." Sharon's blood went cold. "I already gave my statement. I can't." "This isn't about testimony," the lawyer interrupted gently. "It's about new evidence. Evidence that proves Derek was framed for the crimes he confessed to." Sharon's hand tightened on the doorframe. "What kind of evidence? Financial records, communications, security footage." Marcus Vega kept copies of everything insurance in case Derek ever came back. Chen's expression softened. He got sloppy. One of his associates turned on him, handed everything over to the FBI. "The case against Derek collapsed 2 days ago. He's being released." The words didn't land at first. Sharon just stared at the lawyer, her mind refusing to process what he was saying. "Released?" she whispered. "When? He should already be out." Chen handed her a business card. "I thought you'd want to know." He left before Sharon could respond. She stood in the doorway for a long time after he'd gone, the card trembling in her hand, her mind racing. Derek was free. Spring arrived slowly that year, thawing the frozen ground 1 degree at a time. Sharon worked late on a Friday evening, catching up on patient files, letting the familiar routine calm her racing thoughts. It had been 3 weeks since the lawyer's visit. 3 weeks of waiting, watching, expecting Derek to appear, but he hadn't. Maybe he'd decided to stay away, to let her and Donald build their life without him. Maybe freedom meant starting over somewhere far from the wreckage they'd left behind. The thought hurt more than Sharon wanted to admit. She locked up the clinic just after 7 p.m., juggling her keys and purse, her mind already on the drive home. The parking lot was empty, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. "You still hide your fear the same way," a voice said behind her. "By working too much." Sharon froze. She knew that voice, would know it anywhere, in any crowd, across any distance. Slowly, she turned. Derek Xavier stood at the edge of the parking lot, leaning against a streetlight like he'd been waiting for hours. He looked different, thinner, older, his face carved with new lines that hadn't been there before. His suit was simpler, no flash, no menace. Just a man in dark jeans and a jacket, hands in his pockets, watching her with those same dark eyes that had once terrified and captivated her in equal measure. "Derek," Sharon breathed, her keys slipping from her fingers and clattering to the ground. He smiled small, hesitant, uncertain. "Hi." The word broke something open inside her. Sharon crossed the parking lot in 5 steps and threw her arms around him, not caring about propriety or caution or the months of distance between them. Derek caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. "You're here," she whispered against his shoulder. "You're really here." "I'm here." His voice was rough, strained. "I'm sorry it took so long. There were complications, legal things. I wanted to make sure everything was settled before I came back." Sharon pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands framing his face. "I thought you weren't coming." "I told you," Derek said quietly. "I don't let go of what's mine." Tears burned her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear or grief. They were from relief, from hope, from the impossible realization that maybe, just maybe, they'd survived. "Donald asks about you every day," Sharon said, her voice shaking. Derek's composure cracked. "Does he remember me?" "He remembers everything." The next afternoon, They stood together on the hospital steps where it all began. Sharon had suggested it without fully understanding why. Maybe because this was where the story started, where Derek had first claimed his son in public, where the whole town had watched and whispered and judged. Now, 6 months later, they were back. Reporters noticed almost immediately. Cameras appeared. Murmurs rippled through the small crowd gathering on the sidewalk, but this time no one shouted questions. No one rushed forward. They just watched, silent and uncertain, as Derek Xavier, the man they'd condemned, the monster who'd sacrificed himself, knelt on the same steps where his story had exploded. Donald stood at the top of the stairs, holding Sharon's hand, his eyes wide. "Daddy!" His voice was small, disbelieving. Derek's throat worked. "Hey, buddy." For a heartbeat, Donald didn't move. Then his face crumpled, and he let go of Sharon's hand and ran down the steps, across the concrete, straight into Derek's open arms. Derek caught him, lifting him off the ground, burying his face in Donald's curly hair. His shoulders shook, and Sharon realized with a jolt that Derek Xavier, the man who'd faced down rival gangs and federal agents without flinching, was crying. "I missed you," Donald said, his small arms wrapped tight around Derek's neck. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too," Derek whispered. "Every single day." Sharon watched from the top of the steps, tears streaming freely down her face. Around them, the reporters stood silent. The townspeople who'd once whispered and judged now watched with something that might have been understanding, or shame, or maybe just recognition that love, real, messy, dangerous love, didn't fit into neat categories. Derek looked up at Sharon, still holding Donald, his eyes wet and raw and utterly unguarded. And Sharon didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. She just walked down the steps and into his arms. The three of them stood there on the hospital steps, a family forged in chaos, tempered by sacrifice, and somehow, impossibly, still standing. "Let's go home," Sharon said quietly. Derek pressed his forehead to hers. "Where's home?" Sharon smiled through her tears. "Wherever we are. All of us. Together." 6 months later, they didn't go back to the town that had rejected them, didn't try to reclaim the life that had been destroyed. Instead, they built something new. A house in the countryside. Quiet, simple, safe. Derek left his old world behind entirely. No empire, no power, no shadow. Just a man trying to be a father, learning how to live without violence as his answer. It wasn't easy. Some days, the past clawed its way back, nightmares, old enemies resurfacing, the weight of everything they'd survived. But they faced it together, and slowly, day by day, they healed. The town eventually stopped talking. The reporters moved on to other scandals. The whispers faded into memory. But the Watson-Xavier family, messy, imperfect, and fiercely protective of each other, remained. A testament to the truth that love, even the dangerous kind, could outlive the worst of circumstances. And sometimes, the monsters everyone feared were just men trying to protect what mattered most.